My wife and I lost a very good friend of ours very recently. And she was somebody who helped us enormously in setting up a spiritual retreat in France, amongst other things. Just a really good friend. And I was invited by the family to do the eulogy for next week. And I suppose I just sat in my room in the flat looking out. Fortunately, there's a big tree outside, so I kind of get inspiration from looking at this tree. And I was thinking, well, what can I say of any use to this family who have lost this daughter, grandmother, mother. And it struck me that looking at the tree was kind of part of the answer, or would take me towards more of the answer. So looking out at the tree, and I can see the tree now as well. I'm kind of drawn to the shape, but I'm drawn to the leaves, because the leaves are pretty much falling off every day now. And then I thought, well, what is life? You know, I was thinking about this eulogy and the story of a life. And then I started thinking about, well, what's a leaf? You know, and a leaf is no different from a human being. You know, a leaf starts as a tiny bud, like a little baby, and then it nourishes and feeds and grows and gets bigger until it reaches, you know, a maturity, a certain level, and then with the seasons and everything else, it starts to recede. And it begins to age. And then eventually, at some point, which is defined by nature, very often, those leaves, or that leaf, falls off the tree. And invariably they do so in their own time. So you don't have 500 leaves all fall together. You know, one falls in, one falls in, another falls in. It's kind of random. And I found that quite interesting. And so I followed it out, and I thought, well, then the leaf, what happens to the leaf now? When it splits from the tree, it must have this sort of fear, but also this sense of relief. It's not burdened, it's completely free. And then it hits the ground, and it starts to break down. And then it turns into all sorts of organic material, and it gets eaten, and it gets turned over, it turns into bacteria, or feeds bacteria, it feeds mushrooms and fungi and insects and all that. So the leaf's still going, it's just in different forms. And then eventually that leaf, and I had to look this up because I'd forgotten what happened, it turns into carbon dioxide and water. And then that water and the gases get released into the atmosphere. And then, of course, the clouds form and it rains, and the rain nourishes the tree. And the tree grows and new buds appear. Ad infinitum, there's this kind of cycle of life going on that is perfectly natural and okay. So that's what I first kind of was contemplating. And then my mind was sort of inquiring, well, you know, what about water? You know, because we are actually 60% water as human beings in a physical measure. Which is kind of weird, isn't it? Because you don't feel sort of sloppy and you're going to tip over and collapse on the floor and soak into the ground, but you are 60% water from a physical level. And then looking from a subatomic or like the quantum level, You're not water, you're 99.99999% space. So which is true? Are you 60% water or 99.9999% space? Is it one that's true? Is it both that's true? Or is it neither? So from the leading scientific perspective, you're basically empty space, which is a bit of a shock for the ego, isn't it? And if you were to take all of that empty space inside every person across the world and compress it all together and put it into form, then what would be left would just be particles. This is a bit mind-blowing. The particles of us that will be left, apart from space, would fit into the size of a sugar cube. 8 billion people, when you take away the space, fits in to a sugar cube. And perhaps that's the emptiness that things like Buddhism point to. But it's an emptiness that is the essence of all of our lives and our being, which is quite mind-blowing in itself. But then, somebody knocks at the door, the phone rings, you rush out to get to the shops or to go to work, you burn the dinner, you forget to pick up your prescription at the doctor's, you go on holiday and the plane's delayed for 5 hours. So maybe we're missing something by just looking at things in such simple terms. So perhaps rather than just being empty beings, there's more to us. Perhaps the fact that everything's so close, that everything's so interconnected, means that we are also everything else. In which case, depending on where you're looking from, you're something, nothing, and everything. And when you can feel that you have this connection with everything, there's an overriding sense of peace. And the struggle to find, to seek, and to be have dropped away. And in that point, you feel the presence, the deep love that you are, the core of being, that we all are. Maybe you get that for a minute in meditation, or glimpses of it. Maybe you've had longer periods of it. But all we can really say about that core essential self are things like, I'm whole, I feel complete, I don't need anything, I'm not seeking for anything. That's not saying you're perfected and absolutely finished, but you're in a spiral of infinite being, in a sort of freedom that doesn't tie you down to an identity. And these are just my ways of explaining how I understand consciousness. And every religion or every spiritual teaching does that in its own way. So some spiritual teachings culminate in a relationship with the divine, and others culminate in a union with it. Some belief systems and philosophies recognize the body, and others discount the body. Some recognize the mind, and others consider the mind illusory. Some say there's a universal self, and others aim at no self. Self, no self, real, unreal, ignorant, awakened. These are all labels used by different cultures and religions world over to describe the freedom that you are at the core of your being if you dig deep enough. So whichever system you follow or don't follow, it doesn't really matter. But what you're looking for is this free-flowing consciousness, wherein seeking has gone, and you realize a sense of wholeness. You no longer cling to a worldly identity. It doesn't really matter because you see through it. And at that point, maybe you see that nobody is actually awakened, has finished that journey, because awakening is infinite. It's a bit like saying, where's the end of infinity? No, there isn't an end to infinity. There's a deepening, a broadening of awareness that continues in anybody. And you're like a ripe fruit that's fallen, which never lands, spiraling in space. There's nothing there to hold you or capture you, because you have the sense of being limitless. You know that you are being, simply the self. You are the stillness behind any words or in between any words. You are that 99.9999% space. And you are those particles in that sugar cube. They're all part of a singular whole. So you are something, nothing, and everything, as hard as that may be to imagine. How amazing is that? That's why to know yourself is to know others. And to be yourself is to be others. At the core, there's no difference. We realize that we are being in human form. There's nobody more or less. We are one life.